Coming up, we're going to be showing you our rhythmic roguelike shooter where every action is synced to the beat.
And we'll demonstrate that in an exclusive sneak peek at one of our cool music-driven boss fights. Hi, I'm Kai, lead developer at Torched Hill.
Hi, I'm Nick. I'm the audio lead at Torched Hill.
And I'm Brian, the director of marketing at the publisher Freedom Games.
And we're here as part of the London Game Festival official selection to share with you our upcoming game, City of Beats.
Let's hit it.
City of Beats is a music-driven roguelite shooter for PC. And the main gameplay twist is that every action is synced to the music and your weapon shoots the melody.
A lot of people are familiar with roguelikes nowadays. It's a very common genre. But what City of Beats really does differently is the way that it interweaves in music. That's really about kind of getting into a rhythm, feeling kind of the environments that you're around. There's a lot of style to it.
Being able to have musical sound effects that form part of the soundtrack, that's been satisfying and really interesting, and being able to experiment with that.
Let's start with a short trailer to show off the game's vibe and setting. In City of Beats, you're going on expeditions with your hover car, and you're exploring the city and fight an AI that has taken control over security drones and synced them to a shared beat. So let's check out some gameplay. This is the map of the first city district. Red glowing buildings are combat encounters, so we'll jump right into our first music-driven fight. Each encounter you'll get a reward. For example, here we get a weapon mod that makes your power attack shoot again after a half-beat delay, which is pretty powerful. On the map you'll get a preview of the type of reward that you're going to receive, so make sure to choose your next destination depending on how you want to build your character. Now we are choosing a more difficult encounter with better rewards and try out our new weapon upgrade. This time we get lots of yellow orbs, which are the main currency during our expedition. There's also a different currency that you can spend at the hub area between expeditions. There you can unlock persistent upgrades for your character, hovercar and more. You can spend your yellow orbs at shop buildings like this one. Here we are buying the reboot buff, which basically acts as a second life when you die. And off we go into another combat encounter. As you'll see, this time there are more difficult enemies with more complex attack patterns to beat.
So being a roguelite, there's a lot of repetition in terms of not necessarily advancing immediately, but having to go back, improve, learn your patterns, learn your enemies, learn your strategies, improving a little bit every time you play. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a game that's going to be challenging.
This is a quick introduction to some of the enemies in City of Beats. Because this is quite an intense game with lots of things going on simultaneously, we thought it might be helpful to do a breakdown of how the different enemies attack and how their patterns fit into the soundtrack. Although we wouldn't necessarily call this a rhythm action game, each enemy contributes to the music in its own way, and by listening out for them, you can be better prepared to defend and attack at the right time. So in Chapter 1, our most common enemy is the shooter, and this guy moves on the kick drum and shoots on the snare drum. The drum patterns vary slightly from encounter to encounter, but play enough and you should start to recognise the rhythms. We also have two sets of patterns for each encounter, a standard version and a hard version. This, for instance, is the standard version. But if you've chosen a difficult encounter, then you'd get this version instead. Next we have the sniper, which shoots a very fast projectile and does some serious damage if you're not paying attention. There's a 4-note lead up before he shoots, so if you listen out, you can time your dodge accordingly. There's a very small window of opportunity when they drop their shields, so timing is everything when you want to attack. The laser tracer is another tricky enemy. He can cause you a whole load of problems if you're not careful. He has a fairly long charge up and a 3-note warning before he fires a pretty devastating sweeping laser beam at you. He moves on the bass drum and he has a permanent front shield, which means you have to be pretty nimble to actually do any damage. Hunters are proximity mines that follow you around and hopefully explode in your face unless you shoot them down first. They don't do too much damage, but they can be a real pain when you're trying to focus on other enemies. They give off a rhythmic ticking and a synth arpeggio which switches to faster triplets when they get particularly close to you, which gives you a pretty good indication to how much danger you're in. These are the bombardiers. They're pretty common, and they fire large mortar-type shots at the start of every bar. They're not too hard to dodge, but they do a fair amount of damage if you're caught in the blast radius. About halfway across the map, you'll find the Ultradian Bombardier, a kind of mini-boss encounter that presents a real challenge. He fires off a series of mortar shells, which are far less forgiving than those of the regular bombardiers. He also has a shield, which drops while firing. There are 3 stages within the encounter, each with a different attack pattern and melody, and with increasing levels of danger presented by the smaller enemies who spawn in to help. These battles can get pretty heated, but the upgrades that you receive are definitely worth fighting for. Now, a quick preview of Chapter 2 enemies. We don't want to spoil too much, so we're just looking at a couple. The Acid Turret doesn't move around too much, but fires a melodic burst of 6 projectiles at you. He also has a front shield, but is vulnerable while firing. The Acid Grenadiers, they launch bouncing projectiles at you, which fire on the 3rd beat and explode on the following 3rd beat. Avoiding these is a good idea because of the acid damage that they inflict. Obviously, things get much more complicated when these enemies all appear at the same time, but hopefully after a few encounters you'll get to see how they all fit together and will be better prepared to play your way through.
I think people that like, difficult challenges, that's one of the great things about games of this genre is, scaling difficulty. It can be both not super stressful in that there's, you die a lot and there's an expectation that you're going to, start and run the levels again and again and again. So, but there's also, the push to do it as quickly as possible and to be as experienced at it as possible and to get really, really good at it and learn that groove and learn the rhythm. So I think it's really going to mesh with those people who like their gaming experiences to be a full experience instead of, just gameplay. This is really focusing on having it be a fully realized experience of music and style and gameplay all together.
And finally, we have a sneak peek for you, a mini-boss encounter from the 2nd city district that we're currently working on.
And that's a wrap.
Thanks so much to the London Games Festival for giving us the opportunity to show you our music-driven gaming experience.
We are excited to bring this game to you next year. Wishlist it on Steam to stay up to date with our project. Bye.